Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong, where I debunk the Facebook posts of somebody that I used to know who I call Mr. K, and he's just somebody that posts a bunch of stupid right wing crap on his Facebook page. And yeah, that's really all of the background I think I need. So, the meme in question today quotes Ron DeSantis complaining about property taxes. That's right. I guess Ron DeSantis memes are still a thing somehow, even though barely anybody even talks about Ron DeSantis lately. But nevertheless, it's a meme that he shared on Facebook that Mr. K shared. So let's see what Ron DeSantis said. And here it is. If I go to the Best Buy and buy a TV, I pay a sales tax, but I don't keep paying taxes on it year after year. And that's something that is supposed to be like a mic drop moment, I guess. But it sounds like an anti tax freedom anthem, right? Well, it's smoke and mirrors, a shallow talking point that falls apart as soon as you look past the slogan. So you'll notice a lot about right wing politics, and one of the things is they really champion causes that are ultimately reduced to the size of a bumper sticker slogan. And this one might not fit in a bumper sticker quite the way some of them do, but it's really no better than a bumper sticker slogan. And those don't always withstand scrutiny. So, point number one, the GOP is not anti tax, it's pro tax shift. So, that's really one of the things that needs to be noted right off the bat. It's really a major talking point that is quite often missed in these debates and discussions about policy or whatever. They're not anti tax. So, I could almost end the episode right there, but let's proceed. Republicans have never been meaningfully anti tax. What they actually believe in is changing who pays. They slash taxes on the wealthy and corporations, then quietly raise the financial burden on everyone else, and they do it through regressive sales tax, which hit low income people the hardest. So keep that in mind, especially if you are a low income person, as I am, I'm not I'm not some wealthy elite, some millionaire or billionaire over here. I am low income. So what about property taxes and local levies shifted down to states and municipalities after federal cuts? Republicans seem to largely favor that. User fees and privatization schemes that make people pay more directly for public goods. In the UP where I live, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, UPCO is actually, from what I understand, they're privatized. So, yeah, it's a privatization scheme, and the electricity costs have gone up, perfectly matching with the stereotype and, defying the idea that Republicans actually lower costs. Well, no, they don't. They just actually shift the burden more onto the average citizen. So while they call it you know a liberating thing, they're not really liberating people from taxation. What they're really doing is protecting capital from taxation and pushing costs onto wage earners and consumers. This isn't anti-taxation, it's class war through tax policy. So on to point number two. Capitalism itself is a legal system, and taxes are part of how it's maintained. Another talking point that's very sorely overlooked, even though it should be an entry level thing that people are noting all the time. Capitalism is actually a legal system. It's not just the free market, guiding people through some invisible hand or whatever weird gibberish they tell you in elementary school when they, propagandize the capitalistic system. They'll say it's an invisible hand we're all just freely making choices in a free market. They'll throw the word freedom around, with reckless abandon, but it's more complex than that, all right? Capitalism isn't free, it's an elaborate global legal structure. Private property, contract enforcement, intellectual property rights, and the entire framework of ownership exist only because governments legislate and enforce them. That means state power, police, courts, armies, borders, you name it, they're all baked into capitalism's core. Taxes fund that enforcement. So when politicians like Ron DeSantis or Trump claim to be fighting for freedom from taxes, what they're really doing is defending the same legal machine that keeps state capitalism running, big government capitalism, just favoring the owners within it, rather than the little guy. They'll say, "Oh, we're anti-establishment, we're against the elites," and so on and so forth, but they are the elites. They are the establishment, okay? So it's about time people understand that. Point number 3, Trump's tariffs were and are a stealth tax hike on ordinary Americans. Trump's much hyped America First tariffs are in practice massive consumer taxes. When he slaps tariffs on imported goods, whether it's steel, aluminum, electronics, etc., the cost doesn't vanish. It gets passed directly to consumers. Studies by the Federal Reserve and independent economists have confirmed on endless occasions that American households pay the full cost of those tariffs, amounting to hundreds of dollars a year per family at least. Well, I mean, that was during the I'm mostly referring there to the first Trump era. Now, as we've entered phase 2 with his second administration, he's gone much crazier with tariffs. So, it's practically slapping tariffs on everything. So while the GOP rails against taxation in rhetoric, their policies repeatedly create hidden taxes just disguised as market consequences or trade protection. But they are functionally taxes. So that's another thing to just keep in mind. Point number 4, if they were truly anti tax, they'd be proposing real alternatives. So, like, anarchists and libertarian socialists have long argued that the only honest way to be anti tax is to build non state systems for meeting human needs, that is, cooperative ownership, voluntary associations, and common based production. Basically a society that's like one large cooperative full of cooperatives. But Republicans never advocate that. In fact, they would scoff at the very premise, at least in the vast majority of cases, especially nowadays. They don't dismantle hierarchy or state power, they just redirect it. They want a strong state to protect property, borders, police forces, and global corporate dominance. If you're really anti tax, then you are basically anti state. Republicans are not. And it's very crucial to make that distinction when we're talking about who's for big government and who's against big government. In fact, ironically, in a fair amount of cases, you'll find that Democrats are actually more anti big government, at least in some ways that really count. And look, I'm not some huge uh, pro Democratic Party person, but nevertheless, like on a lot of issues that actually really matter, Republicans are not more opposed to big government than the Democratic Party is. Point number 5, they actually expand federal overreach, even territorially. So, despite the small government brand, modern Republicans have consistently expanded federal power when it serves their interests. In fact, they increasingly want to give Donald Trump dictatorial powers. So this can include military expansion and foreign intervention, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. And of course, as I just discussed in one of my recent podcast episodes, there's talk of acquiring Greenland and even Canada. So, I mean, there is no evidence whatsoever that these are people who are in favor of small government or limited government, as sometimes they say. So they also are in favor of domestic surveillance and policing. Federal crackdowns on immigration, reproductive rights, education. They want to make it so. I mean, how they frame a lot of it is like protecting the children or whatever, and gender affirming care is another aspect of this. I mean, the actual conservative position. Get this, like if you're an actual conservative who is in favor of restricting government from dipping its fingers into our private lives or whatever, they actually wouldn't even be opposed to having surgeries on children in terms of like gender reassignment or whatever. They would not even oppose that, because guess what? If a parent, a child, the the doctor all agree to graft deer antlers on a child's head, well, that's kind of none of my business, right? That's like a private decision that those people over there are making, and it would actually be an instance of big government for me to say, "Oh, we have to stop that." Well, no. If a family wants to have that right, that freedom to make that decision for their child, and there's no proof of the child being harmed, and everybody agrees with it that it's sound, well, it's kind of none of my business, and it would be big government for me to try to ban that. And you know what? Deer antlers on somebody's head, they would actually look kind of cool. I could see the merits of that, even just like I can see the merits of any gender affirming care, even though the standard Democratic talking point on this is that children don't get these surgeries. It's not legally allowed, and that's true, mind you. That is true. But nevertheless, even if they were getting these surgeries, they would have that right. Okay, that's actually what conservatism, what small government conservatism would actually uh, allow. You can make modifications to your own body, and the government has no real right to ban it. And like the only sense in which they should intervene is if it truly is being imposed by force. Okay, so there's that. And efforts to annex or exert control over territories like Puerto Rico or influence abroad through violent threats. If they were opposed to big government, they would be, questioning that. They might say, "Well, why is Hawaii still a part of the United States? There are people there who would want Hawaii to be independent. Maybe we should hear them out, see what they have to say." That would actually be a standard sort of talking point if they were really in favor of small government and against oppressive government policies and stuff like that. You know, Instead they're talking about invading Greenland, like I said earlier, and Canada. So while they posture as defenders of limited government, they continuously enlarge the state's footprint, just not in ways that help working people. So the bottom line here is that the "I shouldn't pay taxes on my house every year" line plays well on social media, but it's not liberation. It's really just a cover story. Republicans aren't fighting taxes, they're fighting who gets taxed. They're not dismantling government power, they're weaponizing it to serve capital and theocratic fascist elites. They're not freeing people, they're keeping the capitalist legal system intact while pretending they're your champion against it. So keep all that in mind. They're liars and hypocrites. And a lot of the media messaging on this has been a complete and total failure. Well, maybe I shouldn't say complete and total, but definitely a large scale failure. And we're really paying the price for, I guess, people who just weren't effective in messaging or counter messaging against a lot of these sorts of claims. And, you have to control the narrative, you have to wrest it from the hands of these uh, disreputable forces that are trying to take the concept of freedom and, just totally mutilate it, make it something that's totally unrecognizable. And they're really at the same time, I think, freeing themselves from the restrictions of common sense and actual conservatism.